What's it in Mitchell, Brian?
I did. I didn't get that till you said.
Sudden quiet pause falls over the room.
Well, we were noticing you were counting, so we didn't want to distract you too much.
Hey, for you, take off your shoes again.
I didn't have any problem because I still had one finger left. Yeah, thank y'all for being here today. We were gonna have a meeting of the, report of the projects committee, but several of them couldn't be here today. And so we decided to push that back to the next meeting. Bitsy may want to offer a few comments. I know that she sent me some maps today that maybe help with the minutes from the last meeting, but they'll certainly help with the minutes from the next meeting, so they're at the back of your agenda. Other opening remarks, one of the items of business from last week was to contact the MPO in San Antonio and assess their willingness to continue to work with us and meet with us and hopefully hand off some data or let us dig into that. I checked with Cecilio Martinez, who's their GIS guy. He was more than happy to do that. He was out of town today, but we agreed that we would set up a meeting for early next week, and that we would assess where we are and kind of refresh everybody's memory about what we have and what we don't have. Jonah had expressed an interest in that meeting. Is there anybody else that wants to be involved in that meeting as a GIS committee person? Looks like you and me.
We volunteer Marcus as well.
And Marcus, his appointer, Greg Maxton, told me he would not be here today. He's still interested. We'll get into that in a little bit more, but I expressed an interest in him continuing on as a resource at
Well, Don, if I could ask, in relationship to that meeting seems like a couple of weeks ago, but we had blended the GIS with the projects committee. Do you still intend that to be one consolidated committee, or wait to see what comes out of that discussion?
That would be my hope, is that we continue to go with this is just an initiative to kind of bring that database issue to a resolution and get it into some sort of usable format. If I'm overlooking something, or others have thoughts that are different than that, let me know.
So the GIS data that we're trying to get hold of is basically the crowdsourcing.
Crowdsourcing and
Preferences and desires and problem areas and.
yeah, and go ahead.
Yeah, all that stuff, that everybody works so hard to gather the data, and we have it, but now we need to make it useful.
And they had actually also added to that some information from a prior public involvement process that TxDOT had conducted. And so there's almost two different sets of data that need to be packaged in a way that it's useful knowledge and information. So we will.
And to be clear, there's those 3 maps that were on the website for the crowdsource tool, right? There was the the vehicle transportation, the pedestrian, bike, public transportation one, and then the environmentally sensitive areas. So those are the 3 different tasks. It's just summarize each of those maps in some digestible form.
Okay, the minutes are there for your consideration. Erica did a great job of getting these put together. I've given her my comments, but rather than have you read through all of these minutes today and back you into a corner to approve those, I just leave them there for you to consider, and we will approve those at the next meeting. If y'all are good with that. Thank you, Erica. First opportunity for public comment. Nobody? Okay. It'll be a short meeting today. Okay. Consideration of committee membership matters. Bob, you wanna?
Yeah, the committee last time spent a fair amount of attention, and there was a lot of very serious commentary about the need to be able to make quorum, which again, we're not doing, right? So, we've contacted people that were valuable to the committee but hadn't been able to participate, and asked if they would revisit their decision of whether or not to participate or not. And if we hear back and somebody wants to withdraw and move the place and fail on that, we'll just keep following up until we know that everybody is here, the candidate. You know our governance, we're not gonna be making recommendations that don't clear this committee, and we can't do that without a quorum. So essentially, we're gonna be hamstrung if we can't make a quorum.
Mr. Banwell.
Apologize for being
Good to have-
late,
good to have you with us.
but I agree with everything that Councilman Manning said and then some.
I did hear back from Mayor Maxton with Fair Oaks. Dan Banks had withdrawn from the committee. He's got 2 names under consideration at this time. Marcus would like to stay involved but has significant pressures. And I've given him a couple of options for how he might use both of those other 2 names and Greg, and he's gonna make a decision fairly shortly. Have you heard anything, Joe, one way or the other?
No, I haven't had any conversation with them.
So I know that they're working. I did try to contact Comfort ISD. Superintendent is out of the country, so as soon as she gets back, I will get with her, get a response back from them. Mr. Spain, did we get your email address wrong? We
You
must-
know, evidently you must have had it wrong, but I've got it now, you got it right now, so.
What was being used was the committee email that was assigned to you, not your GUTC one. So we're good.
So,
Thanks for sharing. That was when your reply came, it was useful.
If you guys are not getting emails, the email distribution list, let me know, please, and I'll double check your email and add a personal email to the distribution. So,
anything else on that?
On item 4, I have some thoughts on that, maybe a proposal or something to at least think about, which, when you have 2 things there, attendance requirements and consequences. I don't wanna get ahead of y'all if you're gonna make.
Those are just the general areas of it.
Yeah. I think it might make sense to have a basic attendance requirement as if you miss 3 consecutive meetings. And then maybe it's not a hard, you're kicked off 100%, but maybe at that point, it's sort of like, if you can't show up to the next meeting, we need to have a real clear, I missed those meetings because my dad's sick and I had to fly out of state for a couple of weeks. I'll be back next week, don't worry, it's gonna, I'm not exactly sure how that needs to be articulated, but I feel like having a number of meetings that we have to attend makes sense, or we ask for a replacement. And if a replacement isn't designated in a certain amount of time, then we decide to move forward as if that slot is no longer on the committee. So if there's 20, what was the total number, 20 people, I think?
Less us.
18 less.
Okay, 18 people, so if, for example, I didn't show up at 5 meetings in a row, and y'all are like, we're sick of waiting for him to show up and not meeting a quorum all the time, you would talk to Mayor Handren, because I was appointed by him, and he would say, maybe he doesn't get back to you for 2 weeks, and you say, all right, Mayor, we can't continue waiting, time's up, that we're closing that slot on the committee, or we're moving ahead as if that slot doesn't exist. Because I agree, we can't function as a committee long-term in a situation where we never meet the minimum number of people in order to vote on issues. So there's a lot of holes in that plan, right? But just conceptually, the idea would be have a requirement of a number of meetings, maybe it's consecutive, maybe it's a total, you know, out of every quarter, you gotta at least attend this number, something like that, so.
Well, I think that's the way, in other committees I've been on, you miss 3, you're off. And as you miss your 3, you notify your sponsor that you're off the committee, that he needs to appoint someone else. I think that'd be the cleanest way to do it. Because you're right, if we don't have a quorum there, we can't go forward with any recommendations from the group, because we don't have a.
I don't disagree with any of those comments, and as we move towards our goal of finishing up our work by the fall of 2020, we're gonna be getting some hard recommendations coming out of the projects committee, and if we don't have quorum, I'm not sure how we act on it. So I think we need to be proactive about finding those resolutions soon.
I do think that we should still be understanding of people's situations. If a certain member has a difficult personal situation, maybe we allow them to assign an alternate for a period of time without having them like, sorry, you missed 3, you're out for good, kind of thing. Or maybe there's some flexibility, but in general, I
think an alternate would be, you know, as long as it's an intermittent situation, that would be acceptable.
And I think it would also be important that if we set a number, we also set a time frame associated with that. Because missing 3 over an indefinite period of time,
Yeah.
we'd all be off the committee. So, just say, the time frame would probably work very well.
So we have 2 meetings a month, and a quarter, that would be 6 meetings. I mean, if someone missed 3 meetings in a quarter, that would be half of the meetings in the quarter. It's just frustrating to have members that are missing, like, they're, you know, missing 2 every quarter, like, you know, continually, leaving us with empty chairs, so. We need somebody to be inspired with the perfect formula to figure this out.
Well, I think I've got a sense of the crowd. Unfortunately, we can't really have consensus. We could forge ahead and say, we're going to see if anybody objects, and it would be adopted, but there are some members that are regular attendees that I would like to, you know, I think maybe next meeting, but I think we publish this in the minutes. This is going to be considered at the next meeting, and then we will adopt the new orders.
Let's add groveling and supplication to that language. To come in here and
To give your
prostrate
space.
themselves. Sorry, I just wanted to make it a little lighter.
Great concept, but I wouldn't put it in the minutes.
She's like,
I saw her typing.
Yeah, besides, she's got it videoed too, so it's a matter of unofficial permanent records.
Ben, you're gonna have to do something about the editing of the video.
All right.
before you push leaves the room.
I will attempt to capture that, take what Erica's got in the minutes, capture that as a proposal for the next meeting. There was some discussion regarding traffic data and our need to get traffic data to support recommendations and inform our recommendations. And I know John's got some thoughts about it. I don't know if you want to share those, John, or?
Well, of course, right now, I don't think it's a good time to get traffic data. Not only is it school's out, but TxDOT's got this whole area so screwed up that I don't know how you get a reasonable or realistic traffic count. But we do need that, and there's traffic counts there. TxDOT has got all kinds of traffic counts. But the thing that I always say I want, and I know Bitsy was saying the other day, someone's volunteer, maybe to help us, is that you need to get the turn movements. In other words, it's not good enough just to say, on one day, on 46, we had 18,000 vehicles. Well, were they coming or going? And when they got to Main Street or any other street, you need to have what the traffic is going east and west, north and south, so you can figure out who turned the corner here and went there. In other words, where are they going? We used to do some destination studies where we would actually get people to sit out there with the traffic counter manually and figure out how many people went down this ramp, got on, got off, and how many people were actually on the highway. Well, then you knew exactly by license number where they got on and where they got off. So you could figure out basically where they're going. Now, I got some interesting phone calls from that. When they send the cards out to their house and ask them, do you do this every week or every day and all that? And one wife called me and said, well, my husband didn't go out to that road on that day. Yes, he did. I said, well, maybe we just misread his license. But, it was not a surprising thing. But anyhow, you need to know basically where they're going, not just the gross amount of traffic. And that's hard to get. But, and we're gonna come up with some ideas on how to disperse it or limit it on certain areas. But, yeah, we need to get it, but like I say, right now, with school being out and everything screwed up and down as far as where you're going and trying to go.
Well, school is not gonna be out that much longer.
No.
You know,
But Texas will be here.
Yes, the rest of the
You
national
know,
lives.
I think that's a pretty good bet. My interest in putting this on here really was to get a sense of the committee as to what source of information, what traffic data would be acceptable. There had been during the prior Gateway study a lot of concern and cynicism about the traffic data. And I didn't want to just say, okay, we're gonna do this and then throw it out there and then be confronted with that same level of cynicism. My approach to resolving that is to get the committee to buy in so that y'all can defend it to your friends and neighbors. That yes, we've talked about that and we're okay with that. I'm not real crazy about using these because it's hard to explain to the public.
And that was actually one of the criticisms,
Yeah.
because it was not previously done that way.
Right.
It was a change in format.
Well, just like, I don't have a Bluetooth, so I'm gonna go for free. You're not gonna help me.
Carl probably does that.
Jeff, I wanted to ask you, I know y'all have traffic counts.
So I was gonna jump in there. So yeah, the city has traffic counters and not during school, when school's out, but during the school year, every week we count one of our collector roads. We've been doing that for several years. There was a gap at one point in time, but so we don't count the TxDOT roads because we let TxDOT count their own roads. But I can share what the city has, city counts. So we just have it on the thoroughfare, but we do have counters that will go both directions, so we know whether it's eastbound or westbound, or northbound or southbound. There are counters we tell them.
So they're bi-directional.
Correct.
And then those are on primarily city roads.
The city, our major thoroughfares, the roads that are on our major thoroughfare plan that are not TxDOT.
Is there any way that you can run comparisons historically with that?
For the ones that we have years for, yes. There, a lot of the roads we don't, because the previous people were only studying certain ones, but we've started studying all the roads on the thoroughfare.
What kind of stuff is available for downtown? Thinking specifically about the burning merchants on
So
Main Street.
Main Street's TxDOT, so we don't study TxDOT.
Does TxDOT study Main
Yes.
Street?
Yes, you can go to TxDOT's website and they have 20 years worth of traffic count.
Have you tried to correlate the data to see how well it?
We did, so we actually, when we were looking at doing a 4-lane to 3-lane road conversion on Blanco, we actually did do counts on Blanco, and our counts versus TxDOT counts were very close. Because they have 2 counting locations on Blanco, and we actually put 4 counting locations out, and
Johns Road, you'll probably count Johns Road.
Yes.
So TxDOT counts Main Street,
River Road.
upstream and downstream of Johns Road. Does the amount coming in and leaving kind of?
We've never gone to that level.
Okay, then.
Yeah.
And one of the other aspects of downtown that was discussed last meeting, I found fascinating, but again, I don't know how to get at the data. And it is to deal with the perhaps fact, perhaps myth of who's on Main Street, how many of those people want to be on Main Street, how many 18-wheelers are there really, and are they local or are they trying to get to Kerrville? There is such opinionated divisions around this topic that if there was some way for us to shine a little truth on that, find that truth, that'd be really cool for the community and including our recommendations, but I don't know how to do it.
So, I know it's been a couple of years ago, but I know TxDOT did a Bluetooth study, Highway 46 all the way to Seguin, and I can try to chase down that, but it was really interesting to me to see how many trucks, cars, pinged in Seguin, pinged in Braunfels, pinged in Laverde, pinged in Bernie, and pinged in Kerrville. So the vehicles were making that as the outer loop of San Antonio. I can try to find that study.
And does that segregate out trucks, like big?
It doesn't segregate them.
I think that's the exact data that was like, just because they ping in those locations doesn't mean that's the route. I mean, it's hard to explain how they got the data, so it would be helpful to have it.
I'll try to chase that down.
But I don't know that we want to base our recommendations entirely on that.
Agreed.
But the, Steve Sharma had mentioned that there's some, they call it streetlight programs or something that can actually, they video an area for 24 hours.
So I know they used to basically send a kid out with counters to count right turns, left turns. Now they have fancy game cameras, little cameras that they put up with batteries, and they just leave those up for 24 hours, and then they go back and watch the video and count.
And I think if we can do that, yes, sir.
I mean, just to back up what Jeff's saying, a lot of it's done with video now.
Yeah.
I mean, you can, various levels of, breaking it down by just TMCs, ADTs. There is a streetlight data that you can look at, but that has to be implemented in the city. But a lot of it now is done with cameras, so you're not having somebody just manually sitting out there counting on a board or something.
I know in Comfort, recently, TxDOT authorized a study. We'd had some increase in accidents along Main Street there, and they did the streetlight deal at 2 intersections. It's really pretty interesting, saves a lot of time, and does provide some really useful data if you take the time to sit and look at it, tell you how many near misses you had, which there's so many second separations there, and you can see what we've got a couple of places that are stop signs, and it's obvious the increase in accidents was due in large part to increasing frustration with not being able to get in, people are taking chances. So I think those kinds of data are something that would really be useful. I think hopefully Steve is going to be able to get some of that information and make it available to the community.
Well, I'd be curious to know how many folks are turning right at River Road and Main Street. Because I recall several years ago, TxDOT did a study on that and showed that most of that traffic that comes in, that tees into Main Street and River Road, goes right out towards 10 and Kerrville. And I'd be curious to know if that's still the case. I'd also like to know if we could find out how much traffic at Esser, Hurt, River Road turns left coming into town from 46 as opposed to going right or going straight further down River Road. Those are key intersections. I'd like to know how we can decipher or obtain more information about left turn, right turn, going straight stuff.
Well, and then also which ones of those vehicles crossed 3351 and could have taken a left down Ralph Fair Road and hit I-10, for example? That's what, if we're assuming I-10 is a destination, or if we can figure that out.
Either east or west. I think you're right, Ben. How do we, Jeff, any thoughts on how we might do that?
So I will say we're expecting the developer's TIA that's going to study the River Road Herf intersection shortly, in the next month or two, that'll have counts at that intersection. Because we, as a city, were looking at doing some studies for a handful of intersections, and that was one that we were looking at doing. And then we had a developer approach us about doing a traffic study for that area, part of their
So will that include the left turn from, and going straight along River Road towards Main Street?
Correct.
Okay. When's that expected to be in?
Well, they're waiting for school to start back to
Okay.
do their study.
Would they follow that further down Perth, or, I'm sorry, further down Old San Antonio Road if they go that, or are they just right at the intersection?
So our ordinance for development is they have to do any signal within 2 miles of their project location. So that would probably be beyond the limits of that project.
So Don, and Bob, I love, I mean, I'm a scientist by training, I love the idea of doing more research and stuff on this. But we also, it seems like there, you know, we have a goal and a deadline, and I know how slow this stuff can be and how much money it costs. Are we really at a phase where we can just start throwing out ideas for research and have the time and the money to be able to gather that data and wait for it to come in and then get processed and then be able to make decisions on that data? I'm just not sure about how long the time frame of this committee's existence is, and if this is, if we actually have enough time as a committee to do this.
So there, from the project subcommittee perspective, we've approached our domain as local traffic. And I think some of these questions pertain to regional traffic. And so I think that there's a fair amount of information that the project subcommittee can put out there for ideas that would then need to be followed by more technical looks, including traffic counts and engineering. And Jeff can be a great resource perhaps to help us understand capacity of existing roads and the needs that were defined with the DISD growth. But when you talk about regional, that is a much longer window of time. So I see it as kind of 2 separate questions.
How long are we gonna exist as a committee?
Well, we're not gonna exist long enough to get a regional solution.
Right. That's what I was wondering. I'm just,
But does regional mean countywide or multi-county? That's, I mean, this is a Kendall County Transportation Task Force, not just
So
parties.
I think we are tackling it from a county perspective.
Okay.
But when you talk about traffic that goes from Seguin to Bandera, or from here to Kerrville or San Antonio, that's the regional traffic that we're talking about. That through traffic on 46 that ends up in the middle of town, that everyone is so particularly interested in diverting around town.
But my theory is that we can show that TxDOT was right, that most of that traffic coming in on 46 to Main Street is going right to get 10, I don't care if it's Kerrville, Comfort, or Fredericksburg. Well then, you know, looking at something that connects 46 to 10 outside of Main Street to the northeast would make sense.
So
That's-
I think the discussion has always kind of fallen apart because that particular data set that the city had available via the gateway was very different and distinct from all the historical data. So the historical data shows the majority of the traffic is going to the south, coming from the east. And all of a sudden now with a new methodology, they're saying it's all going to the north. So there's quite a bit of conversation among the people that were most concerned about the data, about the you know, are we comparing apples to apples, or has something changed? So that is the pit right there.
And that's why I think maybe new data is probably better for us
Yeah.
to look at and review and obtain, because things have changed. You know, COVID has changed a lot of migratory patterns.
Herf Road itself changed a lot of.
Yes.
If you're gonna go
Yeah,
south.
absolutely.
if you're gonna
Absolutely
go-
it has.
If you're gonna make a left from River to Main Street, well, you would've made a left on Herf.
Right.
because Herford just opened
Yeah.
at the time that study was done. I mean, it's
So-
brand new, people didn't know to take that turn.
It seems like it's incumbent upon us to get the absolute best data we can if we're gonna make a recommendation.
And it's not, I mean, that data, those data are not static, they're all fluid,
Sure.
they're always changing. I will tell you, the casual observation is that the traffic between Comfort and Bernie headed west has increased dramatically in the last 2 to 3 years. And I don't know where they're going, and this is all times of the year, since COVID's come back.
Mhm.
So, you know, my answer answer to your question about how long we're gonna exist as a committee is, hopefully long enough to get this done. I don't think that we wanna do this in a linear fashion, get the data, then do the analysis, then do the selection. I think we know, just because we're community members, where the hot spots are. We need some data that's gonna support the conclusions and recommendations that we come up with. And we need to study it enough to where we can, people say, well, what are you basing that on? Well, we're basing it on common sense, and we've also got some traffic data here. And I think that just kind of quenches those flames that erupt and undermine any recommendations that we might make. So that's my approach. I don't know if it's wise, prudent, effective, successful.
Don, this was also on the committee that there was like immediate needs and then longer term, and maybe some of this data is for the longer term. I mean, when we talk about 5 Points and we talk about Old San Antonio Road and Cascade Caverns, I'm not sure we need much more data. I mean, we know those, and that's kind of what Bitsy has on that list, so I think there's 2 things. So maybe that is almost done for the committee, but the bigger plan of how to figure out where the traffic is going, coming 46, maybe that's more time and takes more data, but I think some of this can be moved more quickly.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, whatever we come up with, we are not gonna fix all of the traffic problems in Kendall County, so.
No, and it goes back to his point, every day it's changing, that target changes every day. I mean, as to where the traffic's going, why they're going, what they're doing.
Well, and people are changing also because John mentioned TxDOT, right? I mean,
Changing what's going
you see
on
what's
around
going
here.
TxDOT, you're changing your pattern. I mean, going to the Y today, I couldn't go Old San Antonio Road. I went all sorts of convoluted way to get around the river.
We're seeing all sorts of ripple effects all over town as people are making new shortcuts to get somewhere and
Exactly.
avoid that part of town.
Well, they wanna keep driving.
Yeah.
They don't wanna be sitting at the lights, so they just wanna keep driving.
Yeah.
They just find a way to keep your car moving and you're fine.
I mean, I will agree with Bitsy and there were some challenges with the previous data that made people really scratch their head and say, wait a minute, that's not what I'm seeing every day. And I'm used to collecting data that's counterintuitive, and you get results, and you're like, wow, that's strange. But this one, I think, when that happens, it makes sense to look again. The other thing is, like Tim was saying, if traffic is coming into Main Street and turning right, what does that mean? Because a lot of people might just do that to avoid all the mess on the south side of town and go up to Johns Road and go up there, and they end up going south on I-10. So like, you just don't know what people are doing until you know where they're coming from and where they're going. Because the other thing is, if people are leaving some of the developments out, like Herf Ranch, and going north, or one of those other developments out 46 and going north, that's really different than people coming from Bergheim, where there's completely other routes that could be explored for that origin source. And so yeah, that last study just left us with so many questions, like how could there be this many people? And I had talked to one person, they're like, yeah, there must just be a lot of people that have jobs in Kerrville. I'm like, wait, what? Like a lot of people in Bergheim are working in Kerrville? Like, how is it's not fitting, and I just couldn't figure out. And then the other little note on that, which I think is worth just thinking about, is if you look at the data and you find out, hey, a lot of that traffic is regional truck traffic. Well, then we have, like, what do we do with that is really interesting. Because we either say, okay, let's really do a whole lot to make that road a regional truck route and expand it as all the regional truck traffic moves to that. Or we kind of try to think of ways to discourage that and make sure that the regional truck traffic that's just El Paso to Houston, it doesn't try to avoid San Antonio by coming through the country, and we try to make sure they stay on I-10 and go through the city. So this whole situation is really interesting. It's a hard, kind of intractable problem, but anyway, that's a long way of saying I agree. I think more studies, better studies would be helpful, because and I don't know, the origin data, as far as I know, it's really hard, and traffic engineers would love to have that stuff, and it's just not yeah.
The thing that you just triggered me on just now, when you said it's a hard intractable problem, is that, you know, it seems like, and we saw this with the first guy who came and talked about traffic studies. He said, I did this for 30 years, and he goes, and nothing I've done has actually worked, you know, in terms of solutions that came up with. And it gets back to what we talked about early on, which is traffic inducement, which is, okay, you create the capacity, well, now all of a sudden people move in to fill the capacity. And there's this tendency that's fairly well researched that people basically have approximately a 30-minute sort of willingness to commute. Like, as long as you can keep it to 30 minutes, they're gonna make it happen. So we can say, yeah, we solved the problem. We made it so that, you know, traffic flows right through there, and the trucks get through, and it's all good. But it's gonna probably get induced to have traffic until it's a 30-minute wait time. Meaning, while we're sitting here going, well, gosh, we gotta solve that real bad problem right there at River Road and 46, or it's a Herf Road, and you go, yeah, you solved that, you probably end up creating a problem. And that's where the data gets really interesting, because the question becomes, how do you actually create, let's say, a healthy development pattern that isn't just about blowing out, say, 46, what is this, 46 West in that case, or 46 East, I'm sorry, in that case, you know, versus actually creating a quality of life and at the same time moving people where they want to get in a reasonable amount of time. That's actually makes the question even more interesting, in my opinion, than just like, how do we get a short-term benefit and claim success, right? Only to see it turn into the exact same hellscape that people are trying to avoid in the first place.
Oh, Ben, just put a roundabout at 46 and Hershey, forget about it. What do you?
That's what I say.
Just put a roundabout.
Amen. I love when we wax philosophical about this stuff, and John Kite's sitting there thinking about these young guys, just like, man, that we opened up our first traffic book and read a little bit of it. But the only thing that I have researched that actually does solve this problem is something that nobody wants to do. A few cities have done it, nobody wants to do it, and that is, what's the word for it, Ben, or somebody who remembers? It's basically metering, where every road is a toll road, and the metering gets more expensive during peak times. That's the only thing, I mean, the city of
That's
Milwaukee.
not on the minutes, okay?
That's not on the minutes, but that is the only thing that is.
Do we have consensus to that?
Does that start with a T perhaps?
That is the only thing that has been shown
I'd like to see that on
to
minutes, to be honest.
prevent congestion
It's legit.
consistently. Like if you stick a congestion, you just charge a bunch of money, and people are like $8 to drive into downtown. I'm going around, and then, you know, I'm not saying I like
Congestion
congestion
pricing, yeah.
congestion pricing. I'm not saying I'm voting for that, but I'm just saying that's the only thing I have found in my research that actually did solve
Well,
it.
COVID cleared up traffic really.
Maybe we just need more pandemics.
Well, one of the things we need, Tim was talking about, knowing who's turning left and right and all that, which is the same thing I'm talking about. But we need to be careful and don't get our perceptions mixed up with reality. In other words, a lot of people say, oh, all this truck traffic going down Main Street. Oh, is there a lot of traffic going down Main Street? Trucks, or are they delivery trucks servicing downtown area? They're not cross-country trucks. A lot of the cross-country trucks, they come down 46 and go down Main Street to Bandera and over to 10. They don't come through town. So anyhow, just be careful that our perception and the reality are one and the same thing.
And a lot of it might be temporary, like right now Esperanza is developing really fast. They might be big gravel trucks and stuff going down there to do a bunch of work, and in 5 or 10 years, they all won't be there anymore.
Do you remember we're gonna double in size in the next 10 years, so it's not that temporary?
Well, I just think that one development, but yeah.
But that's just for 10 years.
Sure, never gonna stop.
Never gonna stop.
Close the gates in 10 years.
Just follow Austin's model, we'll just stop.
This is what, I'm gonna put a straw man out there and see if it kind of fits what y'all are saying. With regard to traffic counts and traffic data, we ought to assemble the best information that we have from the city. The county has traffic TIAs that it has developers do, and we all do. You have your own counts. And then TxDOT has kids counts. And let's get all those together in one sort of, you know, logical record in some file folder, and say, okay, what does this mean? Let's try to analyze that and see how well it correlates. Then let's also get new data at selected locations that are intended to answer nagging questions, like you're talking about at River Road and those locations. And that wouldn't be a lot, but it would just sort of get some answers to some questions that continue to be out there. And then one of those questions would be, what is the traffic composition on Main Street and probably the River Road section? So we can get a sense of how much is through truck traffic and how much is local truck traffic. And hopefully that will correlate with the recommendations that come from the committee. If not, the committee should have an opportunity to look at that, saying, maybe we need to tweak our recommendations or modify it. Does that sound like a reasonably good plan that we can all support? Not saying what the answers are gonna be, but I'm asking you to support an answer that you don't know what it's gonna be yet, because we're gonna pursue it with an intellectual integrity.
So there are two thoughts about it. I think the historical data is the appropriate data to look at, because right now, everything is so figured up. I don't know that, looking broadly across the community is going to yield us real useful information about typical patterns. What was the second one? But yes, we need more. We have a data cruncher, is the second observation. Because when you start collecting information, I know Jeff has put together a composite map to help us with our visualization of the community relative to the planning units that the BISD demographer use. But, he's an employee of the city. I don't know, who else within the city or who else we could recruit, perhaps pay, to crunch some of that data. Because if you leave it to, civilians, it's more likely to be in error. It would probably be more helpful. What do you think, Jeff?
Truthfully, when it comes to hardcore transportation stuff, we do our counts, but when it comes time to actually looking at stuff, we have consultants. We have consultants that do that work for us. None of us on staff have time, or someone that gets into very technical stuff. But we have full-time, 100% traffic engineers do that for us.
Do you hire your consultants on an evergreen basis, Jeff, or do you hire them for a specific task or project?
So we have a consultant traffic engineer on kind of an evergreen scenario.
The county's gonna hire somebody to help with transportation, traffic, cost estimates, and that consultant could also work, from some of these numbers. I know what's gonna happen. We've never had one before. Everybody's gonna say, oh, wait, you get that guy to do this, and all of a sudden his stack is gonna be, so we'll have to fight for resources there. I think that's the best.
Don, the issue of analysis of data fall within the discussion with the MPO, then is that something that would fall in their bailiwick?
I don't know that they have some traffic counts, but I think they rely on TxDOT and maybe some information they get from the city.
Yeah, they don't do their own traffic studies.
I don't believe so. They have a travel demand model, but that's based
That's
on
what it
population and demographics.
Their interactive map has TDM traffic data, and I didn't look at DDM, but that's 2015, and 2015 TxDOT annual average daily traffic.
I do think that they correlate that. They'll get a travel demand that they project, and, then they say, well, what is the actual travel demand right now per account, and they can tweak that model. But, again, it's a pretty complicated model.
Well, I think that's an important point that Bitsy brought up, that we get all these numbers, what do we do with them, and how do we analyze them to be meaningful, and who does the analysis?
Let me suggest that we consider as a part of this, solving that, it is a real deal, and Joe's concerned, are we gonna study that, or are we gonna make recommendations, and how long are we gonna keep doing this? I think if we can quickly assess and get a hold of some data and understand it without a whole lot of work, that would help some of our recommendations be made, then that's what we ought to do in that context. Then in others, when we know it's gonna take a study, somebody's gonna have to hire a consultant, and it's gonna be a year from now before there's any useful data, that becomes part of our recommendations to the sponsoring agencies, that here are some potential projects that might be relevant in downtown, but we need to know the nature of the traffic to a higher degree than we do. We don't have the resources at the time to solve that one. We as a community recommend that the city or the county or somebody dig deep, get this done. I think that's how we get out of that wilderness of analysis paralysis and never get anything done.
And I was just gonna add, Bob, that I think one of the things, like, you know, in my job is very similar to probably what Jeff does, right? You know, we hire a lot of research contracts with universities and fund this research, and the research comes in and we get this big stack of paper, and we try to make a decision based on that paper. And oftentimes, over years, I've realized, man, we sure have funded a lot of stuff that didn't really help that much in making those decisions. And the question is, sometimes we'll look at this and say, yeah, it'd be great to have this, and oh, we want this, and yeah, I want this. And then later, we're making the decision, turns out we don't use any of that. We already had the tools we needed to make the decision. And you know, I even thought about that with, who cares if traffic's going north or south? All they need is some way to get to I-10, and then they turn at I-10 to go north or south. You know, so like, maybe we don't need to know which direction traffic's going, we just need to get traffic to I-10 so they can choose which way to turn. So that's just an example of, you know, making sure we have a question, you know, and we're stuck. We're like, oh, we need this information in order to make the decision. Will help us make sure that we're focusing in really on the right little pieces of data that we need.
I think you're thinking about the same thing I'm thinking right now. We do all these studies, and if the studies don't come up and show us what we already know what's the problem, then we have a problem. And I think that's been part of our problem here lately, is that the local people didn't accept TxDOT's studies, saying the bulk of the traffic coming, I'm talking about trucks now, coming west on 46 and going north. And they're saying, no, they're not. Well, that's their opinion, but if, like, for instance, at Herf Road and 46, you do a study there, we already know the answer. We know what the problem is. And we know what the problem is on Bandera from Main Street to 10 when it backs up the entire distance. So we don't need a study to tell us that. Common sense tells us so. I think rather than doing an awful lot of expensive study and time consuming, and then doing the analysis, we need to go ahead with what we know the problem is and address these fix-it type things. Now, we can look at long-term, you know, what happens in 10 or 20 years. That's a different deal than what we're talking about here.
Okay, so is that what y'all are saying? Did you have something, Steve?
No, I was just scratching.
Yeah, I had something to add.
Go ahead.
If you take a look at the project subcommittee and what they're looking at is, we're not trying to subcommittee, and John, you've been at one of the meetings, I've been in 3 out of the 4 last meetings on the project subcommittee. And since I've only been on this committee for, what, 6 weeks, the charter of this committee is not to develop the long-term plan, is my understanding, is that we have a backlog of needs right now based on traffic mobility. And to use the best data we have. And that's why the BISD data is so important, the data from developers. So that's actual data. And it's also based on input from BISD on bus driving routes, where the problem is, and input from past studies. So I guess my point and question is, the way the project subcommittee is approaching this is trying to find out what are the current real problems today, and then project out for the next 10-year period, based on the data that we have for developments and the school data, what's gonna happen in the next 10 years, and try to address those that we can see that make logical sense. So we can go to people and say, this is never the final solution, because tomorrow we may need something different. But based on current problems in the foreseeable future, based on data, this is what we know. But we can't answer the details about where this truck is gonna go. But we can tell you the bus can't pick up the kids anymore, etc. So Do I have that right or wrong?
I would say you're right, with one exception. Part of our commission is to look at long-term planning, to address long-term congestion issues. But that is sort of, that's not the first thing we're really shooting for. We are focused on the short range right now.
But is that a 10-year long range, or is it 20 years, or?
There was no time frame put on it.
A lot of the short range stuff you're talking about, like, let's just pick some, let's say Old San Antonio Road. Well, we know it needs to be improved. And at least from my perspective, you put a 3-lane in there, that would carry the traffic for the next X number of years, but with the option that you can expand it. So we're looking at both short-term and long-term projects. You know, and it's gonna be like that on other roads, like maybe the old Fredericksburg Road. It's a 2-lane road. It may be expanded to a 3-lane road. And a 3-lane road will carry a tremendous amount of traffic. But then someday you may wanna go bigger. But I think you can address both short-term and proposals for long-term all in the same project. You understand what I'm
Oh,
saying?
I do, but maybe not in the same project, but in the follow-on project for later time that sets you up that could be phased, like, for example.
No, I'm talking about
rights of way.
phases. Again, let's take Old San Antonio Road. You can go in there and design that road for the full, say, a 5-lane section, 2 lanes each way and a turn lane. That's ultimate that you're gonna put there. Okay, knowing that, you actually, and I've done this, you actually lay out the ultimate. And you figure out how much right-of-way you need, what is the drainage gonna be, what, you know, all the different things. Then you back down and say, right now, we're gonna build 3 lanes, but we've already got it planned, the grades, everything is there for the future. Well, you're way ahead of the game then, you've already got your sidewalks and bikeways out on the edges, stuff like that. So that's what I'm saying, you can do both the short-term fixes that we need to do now, and also prepare for the future, if you need it. It may be that something else happens, but you've already done the planning for the future.
That gets back to what you're saying, phased approach is well known in a sense, but it's just, it's a hybrid of a phase. But I'm also thinking, you know, one of the things I felt like we tasked ourselves with early on was, how can we make our existing infrastructure much more efficient, and then that can become the DNA going forward, so that you actually are being future forward in the sense that instead of using sort of rote techniques that have proven to end up with the same old result, we try some different things that are being demonstrated. For example, again, roundabouts is a very popular topic here. Carmel, Indiana has a whole city built around roundabouts, and they're finding immense efficiency gains and quality of life enhancements. And so that's actually thinking about the future pretty far off by also making adjustments to our current infrastructure now, and making that the new model rather than repeating the old model, and we see where that goes. Just a thought to layer into that whole discussion.
Roundabouts are fantastic, we haven't lived in Europe and a number of countries, the only problem is they drive on the other side of the road.
Yeah.
We're not gonna do that. Everyone's gonna have to shift to the left side of the road.
On the wrong side of the road, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
But looking at roundabouts here in Bernie, you'd be surprised how many of the road intersections a roundabout would fit already in the right of way that's there. You know, and I've got them laid out here, I take it home.
So let me, I heard what Jonah said, and I heard what John said, and I heard what Dell said, and I heard what Ben said. So was that in response to the 3-point plan I had about traffic counts, or
It was.
adjusting that somehow, or?
Maybe. You had talked about some certain ideas for research areas. I think that maybe the projects committee, or maybe, you know, as we're coming upon, coming up to a decision, and it's apparent that in order to make that decision, we need some certain data point in order to make the decision, that's when it becomes really clear, you know, what we need to research. certainly we don't know what decisions we're gonna face exactly and what those are gonna be, so we could just throw that out there, like, hey guys, let's start gathering some data. But, I mean, as far as gathering new data,
Yeah,
but
that's
as
all
far,
right.
but the first part you said about, absolutely, we should be compiling the data we have.
Okay.
I totally support that.
And the part that you were concerned about was getting new data at selected locations to answer nagging questions. That was what triggered you?
Yeah, that, I mean, and I wouldn't say triggered me, but I would just say, I have a lot of nagging questions, but are those questions that we need answered to make decisions? And that's, I just hope that we can make sure that we're not just spending money to answer questions.
I think I have a good example. One of the questions that you and I have spoken about is if 3351 truly is a viable alternative to move from traffic from 46 to I-10, is it sufficient for what traffic it will need to move? And to what extent and expense will it need to be made to make it sufficient? And I think data like that would be very, very helpful, because as long as that idea is floating out there, if we don't have good hard data about its viability, or its utility, then you can't ever get to a consensus about, then do we need a new road? So I think that's an example of data that is pretty essential, that we could flesh out. Not necessarily immediately, but when we're talking about the regional movement of bodies.
I was just grandstanding, Don. I was making a point. I'm happy with the program, I'm happy with the plan that you laid out.
I'm trying to capture,
Yeah.
I mean, it's not my plan, I'm just
No,
capturing what I.
Trying to get consensus without quorum.
Yeah.
Well, be careful. Follow up on Dixie's deal. Bitsy on it.
Dixie.
One of the things we need out at Burton is a sign that says so many miles from Leon Springs to IH10, so people can go down.
Trucks turn here.
Yeah.
There you go.
As the traffic grows, what you need to do is, like, you've got intersections, okay, start putting in center left turn lanes, putting in right turn deceleration, acceleration lanes in a flashing yellow line. Okay, then if it gets worse than that, then you can start thinking of a stoplight, which I don't like on the highway, but 46 has got them from here to New Braunfels. And then if the traffic really gets bad, you expand it to 4 lanes with a grade separation. I mean, these are things that comes in steps as growth occurs. So, you know, with that in mind, that's how you should probably look to the future, that it's doable. And I think the right-of-ways there are ready for 4-lane setup.
I think you'll find that a lot of the project subcommittee work is kind of common sense.
Yeah.
And with very few exceptions at this point in time. We know we need crosswalks, we know we need sidewalks in these areas, we know these neighborhoods that are one way in, one way out are problematic for school traffic. So, you know, those are the kinds of things, we know that it would be so much easier on Cascade Caverns and City Blue to have, you know, 3 lanes, a center turn lane, so that traffic can keep going as people turn into these subdivisions. So I don't know that there's a whole lot more data we really need about some of these projects.
Yeah, I think common sense tells us what the answers are.
All right, I think we have worked over the traffic data topic enough for today. Next item is, do you want to report on anything on your committee's work? Until you have the full committee back up here.
You know, you've heard a lot about it from Dell and myself. The map that you have in this packet is very helpful up to a certain point. Unfortunately, the shaded areas are not absolutely reflecting the original information. What we did, and so I think we're gonna need a color. It's just shaded out in yellow. But it highlights the planning units, the BIS planning units that are expecting the most, like 80% of the growth is confined to, say, for example, I'm looking at the Southwest, you know, it's confined to 26, 25, 24, 22B and A and 21. You know, it's right there. It's not in 16, 13, 15, 18, 17. It's all along I-10. And so our recommendations are very, you know, just, doesn't it make sense to expand City Loop Road? Doesn't it make sense? We have a new road going in Regent Boulevard. There's a right-of-way that extends it beyond that, with a very small parcel to connect it up to Upper Balcones. So our projects subcommittee are looking at the primary areas of growth. And we're just identifying, this is the area that needs to be looked at. We don't need roads all over that whole quadrant at this point in time. And if you're thinking about roads, you know, just take into consideration that data says, this is hypothetical, this is not true. You know, in planning unit 13, you're gonna get 11 more homes. All right, well, you don't need a big road to get 11 more homes. So, so when we finally kind of get this flushed out, we have finished southeast, southwest, northwest. The northeast section is now divided into 3 parts. There's Central Bernie, there's Esperanza, and then there's east of Esperanza to Bergenheim. Because we have very unique needs in all of those. One of which, for example, the Central Bernie, most of that development is going up along 87, 46, you know, the TxDOT road. And there's a senior development up there. There's a couple of small neighborhoods going in up there. Can we build sidewalks on Main Street? TxDOT Main Street. You know, that's kind of a question. And are there roads available to use up there? Not really. You know, so that traffic has to be moved, you know, efficiently onto Main Street. And then off Main Street going over to I-10, which is John's Road, and perhaps some other opportunities. So it's going to be easier to understand this if you can see it in full color. And I'm preemptively asking Jeff, who built us a composite map, if we could maybe just color in some of the planning units that are destined to give the most growth. Because he's got the planning units, the proposed thoroughfare plan, the city limits, county, ETJ, so we can get some sort of relative perspective. You know, the southwest quadrant, and actually southeast, northwest, they all have areas where it's county, city, and other counties. You know, it's Bear County. So those are gonna require more administrative conversations about how do you coordinate between the 3 entities to make something make sense. So it's kind of a short one. But I think better maps would help people.
Brings us to second opportunity for public comment.
I have a question. I'm not public, but will we be able to see Dr. Benny's presentation in full?
Okay, so I've actually loaded it up, put it up on YouTube, actually on the Center for Conservation's YouTube site, and I can share that around, but I also sent it over to Northern to see if we could get a committee YouTube. So that it's, because that's more official, I just grabbed it because I think it's useful.
That's great.
Yeah, I think, Tim, you weren't here when he presented, but it dropped my mouth open to hear how incredibly fragile parts of the county are. And he offered to do more gathering of data for us. And at that time, I thought it would be very helpful to have his perspective of the northeast corridor, which is the alternate to the southeast corridor for a bypass environment. you know, it was startling to me to understand and to hear him say, not only is it, you know, a vulnerable area as far as your aquifer is concerned, but it's a highly unstable environment for structural support.
You're talking about southeast quadrant.
The southeast quadrant, yeah. And so I think if, you know, going forward, it would be very helpful for us to hear a fuller version of his understanding of our geology.
Any word on when, Mr.
Blusenkamp?
Yeah, Blusenkamp?
No, I haven't followed up with him, I will. Yeah, I'm gonna be in 1 week, you know, in a holiday. But yeah, I'll follow up with Andy and see what he has to say. I mean, that's a very different presentation and may not be quite as enriching, honestly, but at the same time, it can give us some understanding that, yeah, there's a biological world underneath our feet that is unseen, but if we treat it as irrelevant, we're shortchanging future generations.
Do we have any more information in the northeast quadrant on sinkholes, course topography and all that?
We do have good information, you know, the landowner across from me and the landowner, you know, one gate down, both have sinkholes on their property. The landowner across the street, he butts up next to Esperanza. And then, of course, you have Cape, right, is it Cape out of
Cape
it?
Out.
Yeah, and there's a whole system that goes up that way. Vince can talk about
Is it
it.
plotted somewhere?
No.
Not publicly, thing that they've been in it.
And even the TSS database, which is a database, is a file cabinet, is not, exhaustive by any means. There's lots of caves on private land that they just never let anybody on to look at. And so-
Because if you're gonna weave your way through that area, you need to know some of these things.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's where you would hope that surveys could be done ahead of time, you know, prior to some sort of land purchases or whatever, to be able to determine, are you purchasing land you can even build a road on?
Absolutely.
But I also remember him commenting that to do those surveys correctly, you have essentially a minute of a police line searching for
Yeah.
a dead body somewhere. I mean, it's a full court press, you
Yeah.
know,
I
with
mean,
a
it's-
flyover or a drone or anything like that. You gotta put boots on the ground.
With a trained eye.
So you get 5 or 6 trained people, and they walk back and forth all day long for a couple days, you know, and, yeah.
Sometimes the property owner lets
Exactly.
I'm more curious if you can just give us this, and to see if we have a need to do something even further than that. In other words, is there enough information to think, okay, it would be in our best interest to go ahead and look?
Yeah, where he made that offer, in his presentation, was the slide that was left blank called recommendations or solutions. And he said, I don't feel like you guys know more than I do about it. It's like, no, we don't. So he just made an offer to do some brainstorming around possible general suggestions. If we were going to try to cross there, how might we approach it? So that, to me, was the context that I heard. Before I forget, I want to ask a completely unrelated question that had to do with having presentations available on the website. Is the fellow from Carmel, Indiana's roundabout presentation, did we capture that?
I think I have that, and I'll have to edit it with this presentation and make it available.
Yeah, we've got it, we just haven't posted on it, have we?
Well,
Because we had
yeah.
cameras rolling that night.
Yeah, that takes a little editing, but I've got it.
Okay.
I think that's essential. There's,
Yeah.
these speakers that you guys are bringing in are powerful, and for new committee members or for the public at large later on when we're trying to get community support around what we're doing. I mean, Fair Oaks already turned down a roundabout because anecdotally they were a pain in the ass, right?
Yes.
And nobody, I don't believe, said in that presentation, walked out of there thinking that they're an irrelevant concept. The data was too compelling, the story he told was too powerful. I like to have that.
Got it. I'll see where I have that.
Okay. I thought of it, I knew I was gonna forget it, so. But,
Jerry, you get your hand up.
Well, just two thoughts. One, going back to caves and sinkholes,
Dr. Bennett.
even though we focus in and we want to know now about the northeast quadrant, I think it'd be helpful for the entire, to at least get a snapshot of the entire county. I understand that there's going to be some blind spots because property owners don't necessarily want to share their data, but it would be helpful. The presentation was very impactful. It was eye-opening to me, and so if we knew about it and other components of the county and how that applies to what we're doing. And going back 10 minutes ago, I think there's really two components we're looking at that we just kind of move in and out of. One is that high-level view of traffic coming from outside the county, going through the county and outside someplace else. But in Betsy's committee work, we're talking about new development, creating some internal structures and how we connect them to existing roadways and what are those recommendations about development of those roadways. So I think we need to keep in mind that we're really talking about two different pieces or two different plans that will need to make recommendations.
Well, is that policy piece that you're referring to, or what we want to say to other developers, like, hey, look, we're gonna put this in here. I know you have a requirement of the county to have, 2 access points, or 2, I'm not sure what the term is it used. But toward creating the connectors between different, so that if another developer moves in, that they can connect between 2 major highways and there's a connection. The other thing too is to have them build according to this new DNA that I keep calling it DNA because I see it as a structural, approach, and how can we facilitate that? Which could also be a carrot with a little bit of transportation costs.
Okay. Jeff, did they close, the right turn lane down on 46 today? You know,
I don't know if they did or not. We're supposed to.
I know they were, up they might delay it or whatever.
I don't know. I don't know.
Where is this at?
46 eastbound coming in front of Whataburger and Home Depot.
Right, that right turn lane's closed. It's supposed to start being closed.
Yeah, that's good fun.
Wait until that's the first 3 weeks. All right. Nothing else. We're adjourned for 2 weeks, and we will focus on your committee's recommendations or your reports.
With perhaps a speaker from.
Yeah, so Jeff, do you think that's viable to, well, there's Andy, but then is it, we could get the gentleman to talk to us about the narrow roads integrating with the wide
They
roads?
said they'll be available next week.
Or
next week.
Yeah.
That'd be great. I mean, they can zoom in
Yeah.
if need be.
And then if we have corrections for the minutes, talk to you.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yes, I can bring you my business card. I don't know if you have my email address, but I can run upstairs and grab one.
I can actually show it to you.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's
Before I
fine.
leave.
All right. Thanks, folks. We're back on our normal meeting schedule.
Don, also for that next meeting, the possibility of an update on the GIS committee if we meet next week or not.